So thanks everyone for watching yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transportation. And what I'm going to talk about this time is uh, trams, streetcars, if you will. I think in American usage, people try to say people treat tram as a foreignism almost to the point that you would call something a tram if it is nice and European, and you will never call an American system a a tram. For example, in Canada, the sort of people who, out of very NIMBY kind of urbanism, try to do a lot of imitation of things that they saw on vacation in Europe. So that's the people who say tram. Uh, Local systems would be called streetcars if they're historic and don't have dedicated lanes, or light rail if they're new and have dedicated lanes and a lot of off-street running. So, um, but for me, trams and streetcars are the same thing. Literally, the German word for tram is Straßenbahn. Uh, so yeah, you can say tramway or you can say Straßenbahn, the same thing. So what are these? So what is a streetcar slash tram? So this is a train that runs in the street, um, which means that it is always subject to traffic. There might be small segments that are separated from traffic, but these are usually peripheral. Um, and okay, and I don't think Google Earth is a very good example. By the way, this is called TransitCon, and I am speaking tomorrow, counting from when I'm recording this, about issues related to high-speed rail. So please join if you haven't already. So I'm going to try to find maps, and it's just going to be easier to do it this way. Trams. Leipzig is the one they kept looking at a lot. Let's look at Berlin. Berlin's kind of weird in this, because essentially this is the tram network, and you might notice something. This is city center. Like the tram network is entirely East Berlin, plus little connections that have been made since reunification, but little. So trams. The important thing about trams, and let me see if it's something that's very obvious here. Okay, it's not very obvious because it's not a full street map. And I don't know if it's being shown on an open railway map very well, the trams, but the point is that these are all major streets. So the point is that trams are intended to run as surface transit. They could have dedicated lanes, or something that are called reservations in American usage, or they could have mixed traffic. Generally, when you build new trams in cities that did not have them before, or that for a long time did not have trams, it's common to build new lines to have dedicated lanes. Although usually there's always going to be some kind of problem segment where maybe one part of the right of way is too narrow, and maybe the city does not want to just ban cars from the street, so it will have a short shared segment. But most of the segments, when they're being built anew, tend to be in reservations. There's also a trend sometimes to turn mixed traffic trams into dedicated lane trams. This is the case in Berlin, in fact. So this is the M10 route. It is an orbital route. So in Berlin, the center of East Berlin was Alexanderplatz. The center of West Berlin, the center of West Berlin was here, but the center of unified Berlin is roughly from Alexanderplatz to Potsdamer Platz, so about this. So you can kind of see the radial trams that go out of Alexanderplatz to the various residential parts of East Berlin. So this would be, so all of this is east. M1 here, M2, M4, M5, M6 here, and then M8. And then there's there is an orbital, which is M10, which goes not quite along the ring. The ring is a little farther out. You can see it more faintly here. The ring is a railway, not a tramway, but closer in on a bunch of major streets. It's kind of I don't want to say kind of make the limit between inner and outer city because all of this is inner city, but vaguely. Anyway, this is mixed between reservation and street running. So I used to live around here, and over here it's street running. They're transitioning to a reservation around here, and I believe they may be extending the reservation a little bit more. I'm not sure. I saw some work in the street. I don't know. I don't know it from any written sources. So the same line can be a mix, but is NICTD? NICTD is oh, you mean the interurban between Chicago and South Bend? I will go over them in a little bit, but I do not. I would not consider this specifically to be a tram. It's commuter rail. But it's a really good question. They do want to talk about the history of the American interurban. And so anyway, the tram, as I said, is or the streetcar runs in the street. Now you can have you can have things that are like trams but run substantially not in the street. And again, I'm collapsing mixed traffic and dedicated lane into the same thing because dedicated lanes on let me zoom into Berlin for a moment and show you what the street the M10 runs on is. It's this one. So this is a boulevard where, yes, in the center of the boulevard, you can get you have two tracks that form the tramway. This and that. You can see them like this, and it's even kind of grassy, whereas maybe you would expect sometimes you would expect that a tram would have tracks embedded directly into the pavement. But even then, the tram has to obey normal traffic laws. It has to stop at the same stoplights as the cars. Pedestrians expect to be able to run across. And so even with the dedicated lane, this is a streetcar. Now, you can have things that are called Stadtbahn in German or light rail in the United States or starkly interurban, where there are substantial segments that are not like that. And this is not going to be about these, but I do want to mention them for completeness' sake. So these are, let's start with two things, and then I'll go over the third, which is the interurban. So the first is the subway surface, and the second is the tram train. And they're both called Stadtbahn in Germany, and they're both called light rail in the United States. So subway surface, okay, and it's not going to be visible on Google Earth, so let's go on Wikipedia. So green line MBTA. That is a subway surface line. It is, I believe, the first subway surface line in the world. It was just one of the first subways in the world. The tunnel opened 1897. So this is this is essentially a buried tram, the subway surface line. Again, this was the first in the world, followed by Philadelphia, which opened its in the early 1900s, not in the early, sometime in the 1900s. I'm forgetting in what year. I want to say 1904, but I'm not sure. Then after World War II, there were many opening in Germany, and then San Francisco opened one in 1980. Belgium has these as well. They're called pre-metros in Belgium. I think Stockholm actually had a pre-metro in the 1930s. It's just that, where did I click? It's just that often these are converted to full metros. It actually happened in Boston, where this tunnel for the Green Line was converted to full metro operations for the Orange Line in 1901, and then it went back to a tram tunnel in 1908 when the Orange Line got a separate tunnel. And so so this tunnel, again, it can be called pre-metro, it can be called subway surface, it can be called Stadtbahn because nearly all German Stadtbahn systems work like this, is you bury the center. So on this map, maybe it's unclear what all these areas are because it's a schematic, but this is city center. And you might even be able to tell because the transfers between subway lines tend to be in city center, and they're literally depicting the transfers here. Park Street for the red line, Government Center for the blue line, and then Haymarket and North Station for the orange line. So the way that this works is you have this central segment, Also, this is about to open. It's called the Green Line extension. You have the central segment from Lechmere, just north of city center, through city center. All of this is still city center. This neighborhood is called Back Bay and is the second downtown of Boston. And then the line moves to the surface, and it always branches. This branch no longer exists, the A branch. So the B branch to Boston College, C to Cleveland Circle, D. This maybe looks like a segment of similar size to C. No, it's not. The D goes way west. It's this is not actually in streetcar mode. This is actually a former commuter branch line that is separate from the street and currently runs these vehicles, but it's not functionally a streetcar. These are the B branch goes on Commonwealth Avenue, the C on I want to say Brighton, or is it? Okay, I'm going to lose all of my Boston crowd because I keep confusing Beacon and Brighton. I believe it's Beacon. It's this one. And now we will see, and now you will laugh at me for not knowing names of cities, names of major Beacon, names of major streets and cities where I do a lot of public transit advocacy. D again is this, and you can kind of see it's a right of way. It's not a street. And then the E is is here on Huntington, and so here it runs in streetcar mode. And again, there are nearly all of the reservation out the outer part doesn't, but the rest does. The C and B are entirely in reservations, and then they go into the tunnel, and they are faster in the tunnel. And if you're wondering why there's branching, there's always going to be branching. The reason is that the tunnel has more capacity than the surface segments. So you want, so to maintain capacity, you want to branch on the surface. And this is a thing on all of the German shotgun systems, also, and all of the American ones. So Philadelphia, again, Boston, and Somerset all are very merging, very, very branching. Brno has a line that's basically yeah. So this is the other example is the tram train. So the tram train is the opposite, and this is more common in newer systems, which are most of the systems that are called light rail in the United States. Again, with these three exceptions, which are Boston, Philadelphia, and San Francisco, are tram trains. So the idea is that you're fast outside where you're running on the surface almost always, but in a right of way. Often a right of way taken from a disused railway. And in Germany, it's an in-use railway in Karlsruhe. And in Karlsruhe, it's also called a Stadtbahn, but it is the opposite of how the normal Stadtbahns in Germany work, like Frankfurt, Stuttgart, Köln, Dortmund, Essen, Hannover, all of these. It's always short tunnel in city center, and then it branches outside city center on the surface. Now, these are mixes, again, of tramway mode and non-tramway mode. And then finally, there's something called the interurban. Now, I want to talk about the interurban a little bit, and the reason is that, you have these transitional examples. You have things that, so Köln is theoretically a Stadtbahn in the sense that there are two tunnels in city center, and then a bunch of surface things feeding them. But the Köln Stadtbahn is usually complicated. So let me see so it's also, I think, the largest in Germany. I'm not yes it is. So it's 200 million riders a year and change. I don't remember what the second largest is. I think Hannover is 170. So this is the map. And there are lines. So for example, the bridge lines go between running surface and then on a bridge separate from all of the traffic and then back on surface. So it's always more complicated. And especially the very large systems like Köln are just more complicated than, I don't know, Duisburg or something, or where it's, I think, just one line. And so there are these transitional examples. There are light rail systems that are a mix of pure streetcar and something better. And but for the most part, streetcar systems are just streetcars. And I do want to talk about the model, but before that, I do want to go into the interurban question. And this is really important because when I think about trams, I think when most people think about trams, we think about the existing really strong tram systems, which are practically all in Central and Eastern Europe. Um, so I actually blogged about this a couple days ago, and I was asking on Twitter about this and to figure out what the largest system is. So the largest system by length is Melbourne, which is very much not Central or Eastern anything, let alone Europe. Uh, but in but it's I don't think it's I don't think it's the busiest. I mean, it's not the busiest. The busiest tramway system in the world is either Budapest or St. Petersburg. I do not know which one because my data on St. Petersburg is a couple years out of date and the trend was disfavorable. Let me check Vienna. I believe the order is St. Petersburg and what are things? 300 million? Yeah, no. It's St. Petersburg and Budapest, each around 400, then Prague, then Paris. I think then it's Vienna, maybe. Um, and uh, and then you have a bunch of 200, like Melbourne and uh, uh, Warsaw. Actually, Warsaw. I think Warszawa is like 220 million, maybe. I literally saw this a couple. So yeah. So this is in Warszawa. It is 200 something million. Uh, Zagreb is about 200. Melbourne is about 200. Zurich is about 200. What is this? Oh, much more. Trams is 270. That might be the sixth largest in the world. I think Krakow might be 200. Brno is actually about 200. Like Brno, I mean, I mean, yes, yes, Warsaw has a very underdeveloped metro, which is why which is why but a majority of public transport ridership in Warsaw is buses. The overall ridership, by the way, is insane. This is 1.1 billion people a year in a metro area that's about 3 million, maybe 3.5. Now, again, most of this is buses, and I imagine there are huge transfer artifacts, but these are like London and Paris numbers. And again, this is a city with two metro lines. Um, Now, bear in mind, uh, Prague is, I believe, about 900 million without the buses. And Prague is what, 2.5 million, the metro area? No, like Prague, I think Prague might be actually the number two city in the world in rail ridership per capita, and it's not that far behind Tokyo. Like Prague specifically is a lot. Budapest is also pretty high. It's not Prague. Um, Again, Brno is very high. Brno is again 200 million in a metro area of 700,000. I mean, so for those of you who don't know Brony, he lives in Prague. So yeah, so it's a meme that other places in Czechia are maybe villages, but Brno actually has a pretty big system. Like Czechia and Slovakia both have pretty big systems. Again, Vienna, Zurich has a big one. Geneva has a big one. How am I pronouncing the name of the city? Geneva? Nobody pronounces it Geneva. Maybe Italian. I mean, Geneva, whatever. You know what city I'm talking about. Basel is pretty big. Leipzig actually is, I think, 120 million. So there are a bunch. Again, they're nearly all in a specific part of the world, which is the German-speaking world plus Eastern Europe. And actually Gothenburg, so that's Sweden, is 140 million at this point. So I bring all this up because these are systems that are often part of the same area, part of a continuous tradition. And when we talk later about the features of trams, we might accidentally talk about the features of trams in just one part of the world because nearly all of the big tramway networks are in one part of the world. So it's important to mention that the United States has its own trams. Or more precisely, America had its own trams. Now, in the entire Western Bloc, with handful of exceptions. Trams were gone after World War II. So they were gone in a bunch of different ways. So you could either replace them with subways, uh, or you could not replace them at all. So the replacement with subways is actually the origin of the Stadtbahn. The origin of the German Stadtbahn was they buried the tramways in city centers all over West Germany. Now, in a few places, they kept some trams. So, for example, in Munich, they kept some of the trams, but they did not build a Stadtbahn because of Munich's size. They built a full-size U-Bahn system. So it's not a system that's a tram outside city center and a subway in city center. No, it's just a subway. The same is true of Nuremberg. And I think in Hamburg, they already had a pre-war subway system that they extended. In fact, it's a mostly elevated system. It's called the Hochbahn. And in the United States, they did not replace them with any kind of public transit. I mean, some places built rapid transit as they were closing the streetcars, like San Francisco, like Washington. But this was a separate thing. So it's a separate history. Anything on Ukraine? I do not know what the Kiev tram. Let me actually check what the ridership on the trams in Kiev is. But I know that it. Okay, that's not that good. 115,000. Kiev is a city of 3 million people. I mean, yeah, Kiev is 3 million people, so this is not that impressive. Now, bear in mind, there's also a Kiev metro. So add this 115 to 400. Yeah, so it's 600 total. So I mean, it's 200. Bear in mind, we're talking about scratching 200 annual rail riders per capita. Berlin is 240. Like, it's not like Kiev is dead or anything. It's just that I would maybe expect more, maybe because I'm thinking about a place like Prague or Warsaw or Budapest, but Kiev is not Warsaw or Prague or Budapest. For example, can you imagine Putin invading Warsaw right now? Now, most of the Ukrainians already think that Putin will not invade after all, but it's imaginable that Putin invades Kiev. It is not imaginable that Putin invades Warsaw. But anyway, no, yeah, the secondary ones I don't know either. I mean, Lviv, forgetting, I think Lviv has 60 million riders, 70 million. And the others I don't remember. It's just, and Lviv doesn't even have a metro. And so anyway, my point of all of this is that we're talking about this history of Eastern Europe not having done this. So in Western Europe and in the United States, they shut down the tram networks to make the city car friendlier. In the United States, this was done, I think, maybe slightly earlier, so in some cities like New York, it was even 1930s, but usually 40s, 50s. Some places then built subways in the 60s and 70s in the United States, but it was separate. This was not linked to the abandonment of the streetcars. And in Germany it was, because they buried the streetcars to the point that a lot of rather NIMBY green urbanists in Germany believe that the model of the Stadtbahn and the model of the subway is inherently flawed and is essentially a car conspiracy to move public transit underground to keep the streets for cars. And such people point to the considerable success, I must add, of the tramway models of the Eastern Bloc, which of course exist here too, because Leipzig was an eastern city. So was Dresden. So was East Berlin. They all retained historic tramway networks and have expanded them. And they have high transit model split, as do, I don't want to say eastern cities because these are eastern cities, but let's call them cities that are perceived as eastern, because at this point I think people have kind of westernized Leipzig and Dresden and East Berlin to the point that there's no kind of situation in which people look at them askance in the way that unfortunately too many Western Europeans consider Eastern Europe to be, I don't know, a wayward child or weird or not really Europe or a periphery to be disciplined. And that mentality just does not exist toward Leipzig and Dresden. Like, I know that there are Westies, there are Besser Westies in Germany, But I mean, I haven't seen any of that sentiment, and I know a lot of people who moved to Berlin from, I don't know, northwest Germany, and I've never heard that sentiment from them. Uh, but anyway, so this was retained in the East. This was also retained in Austria and in Switzerland, often in conjunction with building tunnels. So Vienna did build a full U-Bahn uh, and expanded the mainline rail to the point of it has an S-Bahn. Zurich famously rejected the U-Bahn, but did build not one but two S-Bahn tunnels. In fact, Zurich is the only German-speaking city with two S-Bahn tunnels, because Berlin has three trunk lines, but only one of them is a recent, and by recent I mean 1930s as opposed to 1880s and 90s tunnel. The other two are trench or elevated. Um, so we see retention in Eastern Europe and in Austria and Switzerland, and also kind of uniquely in Gothenburg and in Melbourne. And in the United States, the systems were abandoned, so it might not seem very fruitful to talk about them, but we should talk about them because it is an alternative model. Now, it's a model that we can kind of see places where it did not work. So the model, uh, yeah, yes, and Hiroshima, but Hiroshima has 55 million riders on the streetcars, which is for a metro area of 2 million, not good. Um, I mean, I'm dumping on Silesia because this is a very polycentric metro area around Katowice. Uh, so this is kind of like the roar of Poland, complete with the fact that it's all coal mines, and it's a bunch of cities that have just grown together and without a big center. I mean, there's Katowice, but Katowice is a city of 300 something thousand people. Um, and so these cities, like the core of this area, is around 2 point something million. And then if you go slightly farther out to Rybnik, um, to like something like this, you can hit 3-ish million. I mean, so the entire ridership of Silesia is 5 million, but that includes things that you should not ever consider part of this metro region, like um, like Częstochowa. I mean, no, that's not. That's But anyway, but this is a very polycentric region, um, and it's also horrifically car oriented because there's no single center that people can just take the trains to. The trains are not very frequent; they're not very fast, um, and people are in a weird position where you can have, for example, someone in Bytom who might get a working class job, cleaning something for a client in Gliwice, and then someone in Gliwice is going to clean something in Bytom, and it's not very efficient. Yeah, Silesia voivodeship is about is a historical, yes, and yeah, um, yeah. I'm sorry about mixing uh, languages sometimes in place names. You have not heard me. I don't think you've heard me say Schopenhagen, aka the Swedish first element, and then the German second one. Um, And anyway, so I guess you know just how. But anyway, so the point is that this is a very auto-oriented area. So these 2 point something or 3 million people have uh, streetcar ridership of about 100 and I want to say 110 million people, which is not a lot. Uh, and so the interurban model is they actually have this a little bit here, but it's a model of using streetcars to link different cities. So the United States, essentially in the early 20th century, built an entirely new railway system that was electric, unlike the steam mainline railway network. It was designed as a streetcar, and so it was a lot slower. You could get between New York and Chicago almost entirely on these interurban streetcars. I think there was one gap, maybe two gaps that you could walk across in upstate New York. You could do this also between New York and Boston with no gaps. It took, I believe, 19 hours compared with something like 4.5 or 5 by steam railway, because electrification had only gone as far as New Haven. And often the fares were designed around public transit fares. And importantly, the interurbans, to save money, ran in streetcar mode in city centers. So this was essentially a streetcar that becomes a railway between cities. And these were often used for commuters. These served what are called streetcar suburbs, that is to say, suburbs to which, sorry, suburbs from which one would commute to the city by riding one of these streetcars or interurbans. And only later, so this is 1900 and 1910s, and only later did people get cars and drive everywhere. And and so this was a long part of American history. The one thing that I will caution is that these were not financially very good. I don't know the history of all of them. I know that in Los Angeles, so in Los Angeles is actually a really good example, mostly because I believe it had the largest system, because Los Angeles in the 1920s and 30s was, I think, the fifth largest city in America, or maybe the fourth largest metro area. It was, I think, New York, then Chicago, then Philadelphia, then LA. And so the and LA, unlike these other three cities, did not have a subway at the time. I mean, Chicago did not have a subway; it had the L, but LA did not have rapid transit. And so LA had a system called the red cars, or Pacific Electric, and the yellow car. The yellow car was Los Angeles Railway, which was an urban streetcar. So this is the red line, the red car, not the red line. And you might notice that this is not urban. I mean, yes, today it's all urbanized, but it's areas that were suburbs or even outright rural when the system was in its heydays in the 1920s and 30s. It's just that this was never financially self-sustaining. So public transport in the first half of the 20th century was expected to be profitable. This never was. This was a loss leader for property speculation. So the company that owned it owned a lot of real estate, which was for sale, and then it sold all of the real estate, so it did not need the trains anymore. Now, this is not a streetcar. I need to make it very clear. So this did run in streetcar mode part of the way, but these all had rights of way, and some of these rights of way are now being used for the light rail that LA is building very, very slowly. So, for example, this to Long Beach is the blue line. I think this. So the gold line is not on these alignments, but it's partly in streetcar mode and partly a subway. But going to Pasadena, I think part of the way with the Foothills extension is this, I believe. And what else? They're currently planning on. So this is called the West Santa Ana branch, and there are plans to revive it, which will be done whenever they find the money for it. I think this is used right now. This thing is used for the Orange Line BRT. This right of way. And so these rights of way are being reused for light rail, but these are rights of way. These are not. It's not in the middle of the street usually. And again, the system was unprofitable. And then after World War II, the company sold it to National City Line, aka a company owned by General Motors, for not a lot of money, and then General Motors replaced the streetcars with buses, and then people stopped riding, and ridership was already, I think, kind of on the fritz. World War II changed a lot, especially in Los Angeles. The history of the American Sun Belt, and at the time LA was considered a part of the Sun Belt, is one of post-war, like wartime and post-war military spending. New York, in contrast, was one of the least militarized parts of the United States. There was in fact criticism of the fact that Mayor LaGuardia, who was doing some kind of federal job at the time for wartime planning, was not steering any of the spending to its home city. New York did have the Navy Yard, but compared with the scope of World War II, it was not a lot. I don't know about literally today, but in the 2000s, I poked around, and I believe New York had the lowest federal spending per capita on the military. New York is just not a very militarized place. And in fact, and especially true of the city because the 10th mountain is headquartered. It is headquartered. I do not remember the exact location, but it was in Fort Drum. So the United States has stations an entire division around here, and New York still has very low military spending because, I mean, New York is a big state. This is one division. Texas has two at Fort Hood and a lot of extra other stuff. And so anyway, the Sun Belt is very militarized. If you've read Jane Jacobs, she even predicts the decline of the Sun Belt based on that, which was kind of true of LA. LA actually declined a lot in the early 1990s when military spending fell at the end of the Cold War. So a lot of defense contractors are in this entire arc from Florida to California. San Diego is very militarized. So this area grew a lot during the war. And in particular, it grew without the streetcars being expanded because it's war. You don't expand the streetcars during war. So suddenly lots of people moved to areas that were never served by streetcar. And as soon as the war ended and the fuel rationing ended, they just got cars and drove everywhere. And so the city reoriented itself more around the car. And then the unprofitable streetcar system was sold to GM and then it was replaced with buses. And buses suck. And ridership fell dramatically. Partly the buses were slower, they were not using the rights of way, BRT did not exist at the time as a concept. Partly is the buses just suck because they're buses, they're just not very comfortable to ride. And it's going to be a thing that streetcars, contrary to what some people will tell you, are actually better than buses. Is it better by enough to justify the cost? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but they are better. And so the interurban, which again, the LA network was an interurban, okay? San Bernardino, yes, today it's an exurb of Los Angeles, but look at this distance. I mean, this is the scale. LA to San Bernardino. So this is roughly down to the point of downtown LA. And this is San Bernardino. Yeah, this is... Okay, so just to put things in perspective, this is 89 kilometers. This is the distance, this is more than the distance between DC and Baltimore, or Boston and Providence, or let's see what I can get you in Germany within that radius, 86 kilometers. Frankfurt and Mannheim, which are never merged as metro areas, nobody would even, in the right mind, would think to call them the same metro area. That's about, I think, 60 something. Mannheim to Karlsruhe, yeah, there's technically an S-Bahn line, but they're never considered the same, so it's 55. Munich to Augsburg, 56. To Ingolstadt, 70. So LA to San Bernardino, that's two separate cities. They're merged into the same metro area because LA is an enormous metropolitan expanse. I mean, remember, Metro LA is 18 million people. We do not have metro areas of 18 million people in Euroland, although we soon will because Istanbul is growing very quickly. But certainly not in Germany, and Paris and London, yeah, they're growing, but they're not LA. And so, but these distances, certainly in the early 20th century, LA was not a mega city, so yeah, connect to different cities. And this is also what's going on in Katowice, I shouldn't say Katowice, in Silesia. And it's kind of weird to refer to Silesia like the S is German because in Germany, the word is not Silesia. People say it's Schlesingen. So in Silesia, I guess, these are streetcars that connect all these cities, just not very fast. So I don't know if it means that the interurban as a model is just not very good. And because Dennis was asking at the beginning, yeah, so Chicago to South Bend is historically an interurban, but it has been reinterpreted as a commuter rail. By which I mean it runs commuter rail equipment and it runs into a terminal It runs through the same terminal as the normal commuter trains in Chicago, called Millennium Terminal. It's with the electrified trains. Now, so you had this giant electrified network in early 20th century America, and then it was all scrapped to make room for cars. Often the streetcar companies were required to build the highways that were their own competition, for example, to pave the roads that they ran on so that cars could use them. This was also mirrored in Germany, where the uh, where the Deutsche Reichsbahn was building so much infrastructure that when Hitler decided to build the Autobahn, he turned to Deutsche Bahn as his contractor, so he essentially forced the railway to build the highways that would compete with it. So the railway was run by Prussian militarists, but they were not Nazis. Because, for example, they resented the Nazis, maybe not because they gave it down about the Jews, but because they didn't like cars. So anyway, that's a history. And again, there was retention in the East, and in small parts of the West, like Gothenburg and like Swiss cities and like Austrian cities. Um, And these retained systems, the ones that survived, are actually pretty high ridership because they're decently convenient to ride. And yeah, including and I'm not just talking about the modern ones. I mean, Prague has a bunch of high floor historic streetcars. They're still pretty okay. And often also these areas did not undergo a lot of job sprawl because maybe it was a planned economy in the east, so they just didn't built office parks oriented around the cars because car usage was suppressed. The hallmark of the communist economies was that private consumption was always suppressed. And so the state of capital goods, like I don't know, steel production looked the same as in the capitalist bloc, and then ownership of consumer goods was trash. Now, Austria, Switzerland, and Sweden were not like that at all. Um, but I don't think there was much job sprawl there either. And so these systems still serve a city center decently well. Um, and I bring up this history because when you build a new system from scratch, maybe if the streetcars have been removed and you're trying to reintroduce them, the results are never going to be that good. So in France, that's been happening very aggressively. France, I believe, removed every single streetcar. I think it's even more complete than in the United States. Uh, yeah, I mean, car use. Yeah, I mean, yeah, in East Germany had the Trabi, but the priority was not to build Trabis. The priority was to try to get hard currency. Um, and yeah, they were trash at producing the. I mean, the fact that the Trabi was trash car that was uh, so difficult to produce. Also, and it wasn't trash in the sense it was like mass produced poor junk. It was bespoke, kind of like I shouldn't say bespoke. I mean, maybe bespoke is a word is the wrong word because it was very standardized. It was high cost, high production cost garbage. There's this joke about a Saudi sheikh who hears that oh, you see, when you order a Rolls Royce, you need to wait a year in line for them to make your bespoke car. But the Trabi, you need to wait 15 years. So that must be the best car. So the Saudi sheikh uh, orders a Trabi, and the East German government wants the goodwill and the hard currency, so they send him one immediately. And he says, and he gets it, and he says, "Oh, awesome! While I wait the 15 years for my car, here's the plastic model." Um, so yeah, but anyway, so car usage was suppressed. Now, in some cases, mostly the smaller cities, it just has exploded since because these cities had very wide streets, very modernist streets that are very car friendly, they're very convenient for cars, and now car ownership is essentially liberalized because you're no longer under a communist economy, and so people are getting cars, and so we've seen a big decrease in ridership in, for example, the Baltic cities, just because they're not very large. I'm actually kind of curious whether it's also happened in smaller cities in the V4s, because Katowice, and again, I shouldn't say Katowice, in Upper Silesia, it's a big thing. But at the same time, there was so much car-oriented development that they did not undergo because the kind of job sprawl that happened in the West between the 60s and the 80s didn't happen. So there was more of a retention of an urban core. And yes, there's a lot of job sprawl now, but but city center is desirable enough that it's not as extensive maybe, and so ridership remains strong. Again, it's more of a larger city thing than a smaller city thing. In contrast, when you remove the streetcars, and then you try to reintroduce them, as in France, the list of light rail systems in the US. So the US does have a few retained systems that did not get buried. I do not know if they're going to tell me the opening year of each of these. I hope they do. Yes, they do. So the largest system at this point is LA, and this is 1990. San Francisco, it's in theory 1912, but they buried it in 1980. MBTA is 1897 is the first subway. And so you can kind of say that there do exist. So SEPTA, I think the only old system that still lives. Okay, so I don't mean San Francisco because that's trash. Or Baltimore. Baltimore is also I can't say it's 1992, not 1992. Newark Light Rail is a Stadtbahn. Yeah, so the only I think historic system that still exists is the streetcars in New Orleans. But that's a tourist attraction mostly, like the cable cars of San Francisco. That's not. But by the way, Cleveland 1913. This is a mostly dedicated lane system. The red line is legally okay. That's not the red line because it's not here. But the blue and green lines are very light rail. It's not. They're not tour trams. Now the New Orleans ones are tour streetcars, but they're mostly a tourist attraction. So yeah, look at the ridership. It's trash. And in France, of course, the ridership is not this trashy, but maybe because France did undergo a lot of that job sprawl, the reintroduction is very difficult. So I believe, let me see, let's gonna do a list of light rail systems in France and hope that I'm gonna get, okay, list of, why are you telling me rapid transit in France? Okay, trams in France, okay. Now, here's the question. Are they going to tell me the ridership on these? Because the data exists, but if it's not all in the same... Yeah, so they're all showing me articles, but you might notice something. They're not telling me the ridership for some reason. I believe the busiest is Bordeaux. Which is, I believe it's also the largest one that is in a city that does not have rapid transit. Are you going to tell me the annual ridership is about 100 million? Now, Bordeaux isn't a large city. Bordeaux is 1 million people. Yeah, and so there were cuts in Eastern Europe, but there were also cuts in Western Europe. Remember, France got rid of all the trams. It's just that most cities built light metro systems afterward, like Lille, Marseille. Lyon was not a light metro. Lyon was a full metro. It was built in the 1970s in conjunction, and it was more integrated. So the Lyon Metro was built in the 1970s in conjunction with Pardieu, the new business center that would be connected to the then under construction TGV system. And so there was much more coordination of construction. And in fact, we also see this with good subway systems. That the recent subway systems in Europe employ, or recent subway extensions, they employ extensive transit-oriented development, especially when they go farther out. So, for example, the Stockholm Metro extensions are bundled with TOD. The Oslo Metro expansion is bundled with TOD. And this is how, so essentially you make sure that as you expand the network, you make sure that the city's geography is compatible with the infrastructure that you're building. And now they do TOD in France. Okay, I don't want to portray France as like America, but But France has had so much retail sprawl. In fact, France and America invented the hypermarket at the same time. I believe Walmart and Carrefour opened their first store in the same year, maybe 1962, I think. And if I'm wrong, then they're not off by 10 years. I'm off by like 2 years. And so maybe in the smaller cities, there just isn't as much in city center to go to. Now, I don't want to exaggerate this because, again, so I only noted that in Lyon and Paris. Lyon and Paris are both very centralized. Paris has more job centralization in the city. Maybe not in its small, high-rate city center, but in the city, yeah, Paris has more job centralization by a small margin than any American city. Um, Lyon also, but Lyon is a smaller city, and generally, and if you measure job centralization by fixed area, I used 100 square kilometers in my analysis because that's roughly Paris and Vancouver's surface area, and it's easier for me to find the data at the municipal level in France and Canada. It's something special. Um, and so at a fixed area, you will expect smaller cities to have more centralization than large cities. And you do. It's just that. So Paris is roughly it's a little bit more centralized in San Francisco, Boston, New York. So maybe New York gets the advantage because New York is bigger. So 100 square kilometers there is a smaller relative thing than maybe the rest. But it's New York. Yeah, New York is rather centralized. But maybe it's just not like that in a place like Bordeaux or Strasbourg. Like Strasbourg is supposed to have a really nice tramway network, but I think 60 million riders or 70 million riders a year. Leipzig is 120. And yeah, Leipzig is bigger than Strasbourg, but not by much. Yeah, no, there are all these tiny French towns that have tramways, and they get decent ridership, just not a lot of ridership. And likewise, you have a lot of smallish French cities that have these light metro systems, like Lille. And they get some ridership, just not a lot. Like all of these secondary metro areas are like 15% model split. Um, at the departmental level, so like Lille, Strasbourg, Dijon, Marseille, Bordeaux, Toulouse, Nice. They're all like 13, 14, 15, 16. Lyon's 20. 20% of all hubs, it's Vancouver. Paris is 43%. So this is like a transit city. And yeah, you can get these really high numbers. And I won't say Prague, but Prague isn't a tram city. Prague has more ridership on the metro than the tram. Prague's just a very strong transit city. Or Vienna, same thing. But there are some tram-only places or tram and S-Bahn places like Leipzig that have good ridership, but I think a lot of it has to come from the fact that it's continuous. So they did not undergo as much job sprawl. They did undergo residential sprawl, but often it was next tramway uh, lines, and by the time that they transitioned out of communism, TOD became in vogue and urbanism became in vogue. And maybe in the 1990s was a little different, but the 1990s were one decade. The United States had this from like 1945 to 2000 and something. And so maybe it's just a time thing where it's something that you just can't replicate. I'm not sure. So I don't know whether a city that does not have pre-existing tramways can replicate what a place like Krakow has, or Brno, or any of these 150 or 200 million a year systems in cities where you would not expect it. Like I think Belgrade has this, or I know Zagreb is 200 million. Belgrade, I don't know the ridership. I imagine it should be somewhere. Now I do want to talk about Belgrade. Now, why do I want to talk about Belgrade, which is a city that I've never lived in? So part of it is that there's someone who I don't know. So I don't know if Flair is watching this, but it's someone that I know from various discords, from various gamer discords. He was my D&D GM at one point. He lives in Belgrade, and he complained incessantly to me about the inconvenience of having to ride the tram to work. And now they're building a metro. Now, what I mentioned that they're building a metro is that Belgrade, I think, might be the largest European metro area that does not have a metro system. Um, I'm not sure. I should actually check this. So Belgrade is about the same size as Zurich. Zurich has no metro, but Zurich does have two S-Bahn tunnels. Now, Belgrade did open an S-Bahn tunnel last decade, and now they're building a two-line metro system. They literally started working on it a couple months ago, because the situation is just intolerable. It's just not. I mean, yes, there are jobs in city center, but there are also lots of jobs not in city center. So if you need to transfer, it's kind of hell. And the trams are incredibly overcrowded. Again, 200 million a year on a tram system, you think, oh, it's such a big thing. Yeah, well, it's really overcrowded. It's like saying, oh, nice, the Tokyo railway network has 14 billion or 15 billion at this point riders a year. Well, yes, go see the videos at rush hour out of Tokyo. Now, 200 million is almost two full orders of magnitude less than 15 billion, let's face it. But also, a tramway is not a railway. Belgrade is a city of 1.7 million, not 37 million. Um, and so uh, there's just a lot of crowding. The same way that where you're seeing a bus network that has very high ridership, you might think, "Ooh, it's a BRT success." Well, it's people who have to like literally sit on someone else's lap. Like in Bogota, Transmilenio is incredibly overcrowded to the point that they're starting to build a metro at very high cost, I might add. And it's the same in these places that have these kind of precipice systems that are these tramway networks that are very strong. Again, I shouldn't say all of them because I don't think Brno is building a metro. Um, but also Belgrade is more than twice the size of Brno. Brno is 700,000. Belgrade is 1.7 million. So this kind of and I'm harping on this on the situation in Belgrade because they're worthless people, and I'm going to call them NIMBYs, but it's not, and because these people are also usually housing NIMBYs, but it's not quite the same as NIMBYs. And it's specifically, oh, oh, nice. That's nice. Um, Brno is a village, but I mean, it's a village with light rail ridership that might actually plausibly be the largest in the world for a city that doesn't have a subway. Um, city. And yeah, I mean, the point I'm making is in the more functional parts of Eastern Europe, even villages have functional transit. And so they need to have like something like a city center, which Silesia, you know what I'm talking about. Katowice and surrounding cities only have Katowice, and maybe they're reorienting around the city center in Katowice, but it's taking a while. These are areas with coal jobs. Maybe if you're watching this from somewhere in the Western Bloc, then you're thinking, oh, coal probably means a lot of abandonment and grime because you're thinking about coal country in Britain or in the United States or in Germany where it's all abandoned or about to be abandoned. But Poland is the exact opposite. It's like talking about outsourcing or like offshoring tech jobs. Um, the experience of offshoring is dramatically different when you're talking to someone in the Philippines or in India from when you're talking to someone in the United States or Britain. And it's the same thing with coal. So the perception, at least from what I've been told in Silesia, is that the coal is just yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of this coal mining, and these are high-paying jobs. I mean, they're terrible jobs, and they're terrible for your health, and they're really inconvenient. So they have to pay extra. It's maybe more like the experience of working on an oil rig if you're American, because the whole point of these kind of oil jobs is that you get a lot of money. You get a lot of money because you need to spend so much of your life in places like, if you're very lucky, North Dakota. If you're less lucky, the North Slope of Alaska. Now, because nobody wants to be in the North Slope of Alaska, these are insanely high wages for jobs that don't require a college degree. And often the politics of these jobs, besides the fact that these are anti-environmentalist people, are like, oh my God, I'm getting paid $250,000 a year, and I didn't need to go to college. Where do these eggheads want everyone to go be a bookworm? This is a literal thing. Um, yeah, pieces. I mean, peace is peace. I mean, and Katowice, like, so Silesia is not an area that votes peace. Peace is mostly central and eastern Poland minus Warszawa, maybe also Krakow. Like if you want to know the pattern, the pattern actually conforms very well to the boundaries of Poland. before the war because, but let me see if I can find the Poland for election maybe. Let me find, I don't remember when the election was. Maybe 2005. Because there was this election that was very close between PO and Peace. Yeah, this one. Um, so, so the pattern, so this actually corresponds to corresponds roughly to the boundaries of German control. It's roughly what had been German before World War One. So if you're wondering why, there's a correct explanation and an incorrect explanation. And the correct explanation is that, remember how I said before that there was so remember how I said either this way or previous idea that there was this history of ethnic cleansing in Poland where they moved Poland to the west after World War II. So roughly this area had been like Western Ukraine, Belarus, and like a sliver of Lithuania. Had been part of Poland between the two wars. Not this part, this part was Czechoslovakia, I believe. And then this part was old Germany. And like if it's just on the east of the border, it was entirely German cities. Like this city is now called Szczecin. It was not called Szczecin, it was called Stettin. It was an entirely German city. It was the traditional port of Berlin. And then after the war, Stalin essentially demanded territory at the expense of Germany, but the USSR did not border Germany. So what they did is they took all the Poles here, they ethnically cleansed them to areas that were given to Poland, and then this became the Soviet Union. This became the Soviet Union, and the Poles from all these areas were ethnically cleansed. And where were they resettled? Well, in areas that had been part of Germany, like Frank Danzig, and this area and these areas, because the Germans had been ethnically cleansed toward Germany. So essentially over here, what you're seeing is a lot of Polish people who don't have very deep roots in the area because they were ethnically cleansed there at the end of the war. So they adopted, let's call them Jewish attitudes a little bit, where where there's maybe more investment in skill and less investment in landed property. So it's kind of like a more mobile, more, I don't know what to call it. I don't want to say either urban bourgeois or working class because these are both very mobile classes. So these are also less extreme right. Whereas, and there's an incorrect explanation, which is people saying that there's deep roots. No, there aren't deep roots. It's just, I mean, like literally in this part of Poland. So this was part of East Prussia before World War II. So this had a Polish minority. They do not have the same attitudes toward work versus real estate as the people who are here because they have been ethnically cleansed from things that are here and are no longer in Poland. So at any rate, yeah. So in all of these Silesian cities, they tend to not be peace voters. But for example, it is not safe in these places for two men or for two women to be holding hands. In Warsaw, it is. Not on the train to Warsaw, but in Warsaw, yeah, you can be a lesbian couple or a gay couple and you can hold hands. But I don't think you can in these various mining towns. But at any rate, so you have this kind of not very urban mentality, and I don't just mean that two men or two women can't hold hands together. I mean it's a large urban agglomeration. It's kind of like the Ruhr, but it's not. But there's no big urban center to it, and that just weakens public transit. And this is also true of the Rhine River, by the way. The Rhine River had something like 1 billion rail riders across all modes. But the Rhine River is an area of 11 million people. Like 1 billion or 1.2 billion riders is not that impressive. Berlin has between the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn and the streetcars, maybe 1.1 million or 1.2 million. Yeah, it's 1.2 million. We have 5 million people. So, like, on more than twice our population, this part of Germany has what, the same rail ridership? Like I keep harping on the importance of centralization of large city centers for public transit because there's this kind of mentality that it's more moral to be polycentered than monocentered for some reason. But first of all, it's not more moral. And second, you need some kind of centricity to have good public transit, and this is true of trams as well as of subways. And and so and I'm being very pessimistic right now because I don't think that a random city that throw away all its trams can become the next Vienna or the next Prague or the next Brno or the next Zagreb or the next Belgrade or the next Krakow or the next Łódź. Um, and so, for example, if I were to, I don't know, if people in, I don't know, Vilnius or something or in Riga were asking me to advise on what to do, I would not immediately tell them, oh yeah, just be like Leipzig or just be like Brno. I mean, Riga is a larger city than Brno. Riga is a city, like the metro area of Riga is about 1 million people. Um, it was in the 1980s considered big enough to warrant a metro with just, and they planned a 3-line metro system for Riga, and then there was the 1980s recession uh, in the Soviet Union, and then there was no more Soviet Union. And then when that got resolved, they realized that the city is kind of shrinking because people are emigrating, and then they can't actually build a subway here. Um, so like if people here or here in Tallinn or in Vilnius or Kaunas are asking me, Alon, what do you do? I would not immediately say, again, just be like Helsinki, just be like Tampere, just be like Brno. I mean, it might be possible, but it requires a lot more thought. And it's not just a matter of network design. So, I mean, network design is something that I harp on a lot, and the reason is that the Americans and Canadians who out of this kind of NIMBYism think that it's more moral to do streetcars than to do subways. You see a lot in Vancouver because of Patrick Condon. So in Patrick Condon thought the correct thing to do in Vancouver is to not build any subways and build a grid of tramways. Riga tram. I did look at the Riga tram. I don't think that I remember what the ridership is. Um, yeah, okay, so 150 million. It's okay, but I mean, it's a city of 1 million people. I mean, it's a city with suburbs of 1 million people. Like 150 million is okay, but it's not that impressive. Like you get better. I mean, there exist better things per capita. Um, for example, in Switzerland, or for that matter, in Czechia. I mean, remember, it's a larger city than Brno with fewer riders than Brno. And um, so if Riga wants to expand, so again, Riga is maybe not a bad example. It's just not as good as it can be. Now, so we'll talk maybe about issues of TOD. I don't know. So there are some network design things that I see with trams. The first is that because these are all historic networks, they're all full of weird seams. Let me see if I can find a map of Riga, and then I'm gonna not find it, and I'm gonna give up. See, network map. It's a very nice map, except I'm not seeing trams on this map. Okay, now with this maybe. Okay, so this is kind of a weird system to be honest. Like, I mean, okay, I have a study center, somehow 2 lines. Like, again, all of these are very convoluted systems because of the history of it. Often it's more lines, maybe some of them were cut, but not all of them were cut. So it's very rarely a neat network. Now, the Stadtbahn systems are often very neat networks because they cut them at roughly the same time and they need to think where the subway would go. So the Stadtbahn in, let's say, Hanover, it's for the most part 3 lines that all meet at one point. Not quite because there's a weird seam there, but it's close. So there is something that, oh my god, am I getting SVG? Yes, I am. Okay, PNGs load faster. So this is a little weird because one of these trams, uh, I think, doesn't go into the U-Bahn. It only goes around. Um, But these are three lines. I mean, it looks like two lines, but it's not. It's three separate lines. And then, so this is Hannover, and you can see it's just a much more coherent network, or Dortmund actually is the one that I like looking at the most. Have you ever been to Dortmund? No. Am I likely to go to visit? Probably, maybe, but so in Dortmund, because they had to think about network design when they were burying the lighter colored lines, so these ones, they had to make it more coherent. So you have this line, which is U43 and 44, goes east-west. And then you have two other lines which are radial. You have U401579, which goes northwest to southeast. And then you have U42 and 46, which go northeast to southwest. And yes, there's a little, I mean, and yeah, there's this little seam where the tunnel splits, and you have a loop that goes to both U45 with this and U46. So it's not perfect, but it's decently coherent. And then you go to all of these all-surface systems, and you go, what the hell? How do I go anywhere? So let me see if I can find trams in Zagreb. So again, this is one of the largest networks in the world that do not have a subway. This is how it looks. So first of all, see how interlined this is. So I have, let's say, line 11 that goes, great, so this is a neat line, just goes straight east-west. Very simple, very straight, will not have rocks thrown at it. And you have line 1, which goes like this. And then I have line 2, which starts at the same terminal as 11. We can trace it. You see 2 here, 2 here, 2 here. But then there's also line 3, which suddenly branches off here, and then does this. So you see how convoluted this is for a system that's not actually that large? It's just a common occurrence in all tram networks. Now, again, because it occurs literally anywhere, I don't want to immediately say it's a terrible thing, don't do it. It looks like kind of weird. I wonder if there's a way of simplifying it, especially if you're not. So the thing is, again, all of these big networks are inherited. So Zagreb, so it's not like Zagreb spent the last 20 years building this. Paris, yeah, spent the last 30 years building a tramway network that at this point has like 350 million riders, which make it either like number 4 or 5 in size in the world, and it is rising very quickly because it's 4, it's ahead of Vienna, and it's growing very quickly. But that's a system that's coherently circumferential to the metro. That's why I don't like talking about tramway networks in places that are mostly metro-based, only about ones that are tram-based. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Prague because it's a combo, but not about Paris, where the trams are very secondary. But the point is that in Zagreb, it's an inherited network, or in Brno, or in Prague, it's the things that survive the bloodbath, or in St. Petersburg, where they keep bloodbathing things. Like in Russia is Russia is at this point repeating all of the mistakes of 1950s America, and ripping out trolleybuses to replace them with battery electrics, ripping out streetcars. I want to say doing mild ethnic cleansing, but no, I don't think Russia is doing the sort of Operation Wetback style ethnic cleansing the United States did. It's just doing random military adventures that kill people and mostly make Russia's global diplomatic position weaker. Very like Kaiser Wilhelm vibes, like a guy who like very professionally started a war that led to the destruction of the German Empire. Good job. And the deaths of tens of millions of people, but that he didn't care about. And so anyway, these are not very coherent networks because they're all inherited. So maybe if you're trying to do a newer network, you want to be more coherent. The problem is when I think of a more coherent looking network, I think about Bordeaux. And I mean, Bordeaux. So the Bordeaux Tramway looks like this. Okay, it's a coherent system uh, where, yeah, there's some interlining, but not a lot. Not that many different lines. Um, they all meet in city center in a triangle, like it's a subway. It looks actually like a three-line subway network in many ways, or at this point in four-line, but D. But so maybe it's just a smaller network, but it goes very deep into the suburbs, I guess, which is why, I mean, so the tramway in Bordeaux, what's the total length of that? 77 kilometers, which is decent. It's not amazing, but it's decent. So this is, let's say it's a little more than a million or a million point something per kilometer, and let's compare this. Okay, you see, this is what I write about when I talk about Riga, but or Europe in general. They're saying 146 million. What's the total length? Or are you not telling me the length? Okay, I don't think they're telling me the length. Okay, so this is not a bad example. So let's do Leipzig, trams in Leipzig. And the reason I'm doing it is because because Leipzig, I know I will find the thing for. So Leipzig is 148 kilometers, and the ridership is uh, about it is. Wait, it might actually be less per kilometer. Yeah, so it's kind of weird. Like the Streckenlänge is 140. Oh, I'm saying what they're saying. I don't know. The Linienlänge is just with lines that are double. So it's 146 kilometers, and the ridership is 140. Yeah, okay. So actually, Bordeaux is a bigger system. Like not a bigger. It's a busier system per kilometer. Huh. Let me see if I what happens if I do Straßenbahn City. Um, so this is yeah. So Zurich is 84 kilometers, so a little bit more uh than Bordeaux, but it is more than twice the ridership. Um, but maybe Zurich is very unique. I'm not sure. Yeah, Russian cities are surprisingly big, yes. Um, and sure, I mean Russia has a bunch of cities that are a million. But I will point out, Moscow is barely bigger than London and Paris. Russia has 150 million people. France and Germany are 60 something. Like Moscow is not a large city for how big Russia is. Saint Petersburg, yeah, it's a large second city. It's the largest second city in Europe, but it's not much bigger than Barcelona. Um, it's bigger than Birmingham, but I mean, vaguely the same order as Birmingham. So, like, Russian cities are not that big. And yeah, you have a bunch that are, and you have all the random million-ish people cities. You have the Ekaterinburgs, the Chelyabinsk, the Omsks. Um, but, um, but for example, they don't have very strong metro ridership, any of them. St. Petersburg, right? Moscow obviously does, but let me check the Ekaterinburg or the Novosibirsk. Novosibirsk. And if I can't find on Wikipedia, I did at one point have the complete ridership for all of the former Soviet Union metros. So when I have metros, so this is not a full list, and it is also at this point kind of out of date. But you can see all the random former Soviet metros that I found just because I found one fact sheet that has all of the former Soviet systems. Like Ekaterinburg is not very strong. And yeah, you might say, oh, it's more than London. Well, yeah, London has an enormous system full of very weak tails in West London. Ekaterinburg, one line. Novosibirsk, I think this might be two lines. I'm not sure. Just these are just very weak systems. Um, yeah. So the part, yes. So the part about Soviet cities being inefficiently spread out, yes. So specifically, what happened is that they didn't is that they were loath to redevelop. So what they did, and you see a lot in Moskva, is that Stalin built a ring of public housing around city center, and you would expect that there would be more commercialization around city center, but this did not happen. So On the one hand, there was no job sprawl in the sense of stuff moving to the side of the highway, but when they built new factories and office buildings, instead of taking neighborhoods near city center and commercializing them, as is common in East Asia and in Western Europe. No, I do not want to buy any of this. Go away. And the uh, so anyway, the point is that when they needed to build more factories and more office buildings, they built them at the rim of these cities because they were not doing reuse. And likewise, they kept building bigger housing projects farther out. So the point is that you have a weird density gradient, and that density does not peak near the center in Moscow, whereas it does in a place like Paris. And so this has so as far as transit goes, it has benefits like no mass abandonment of city center in favor of office parks, and drawbacks like um like not enough commercialization around city center, and not a lot of and also a lot of very old style heavy industry, because the Soviet like essentially the communist ideology of development was kind of freezing the industrial relations of the early 20th century. So they were thinking in terms of producing the goods that made for capitalist prosperity in the 1920s and producing them for everyone, not just for the middle class. But by the 1950s and 60s, the capitalist world had moved on and wanted, for example, consumer goods or light industry. And so there's a lot of very heavy industry in these cities. And yes, there's a lot of TOD in Eastern Europe, where you would build a new thing and then you would build things on top of it. Not everywhere. I mean, you can't always see it very well, but yeah, but if it was new, yeah, could be built on top of the metro. But that, by the way, is not just Prague. I mean, Stockholm and Copenhagen did the same thing. So Copenhagen had the finger plan, which was not subway, it was commuter rail. But oh right, of course I'm not saying it. I'm doing DE instead of E, also separately. Yeah, oh, they want me to do a capital P. Um, so this is the finger plan. Gray, green, gray, green, gray, green, gray, green, gray. Um, so the idea is that development is to follow the commuter rail lines roughly. Um, and they did and they're doing not something that's as neat, but very effective in Stockholm with the metro. So it can happen in capitalist economies, and yet Sweden and Denmark are highly capitalist. Ask any tanky. It's usually like a thing where the two like arms together meme. So tankies, neoliberals, agreeing that the Nordic countries are capitalist. Um, and anyway, so the point of all of this is that um, there is a lot of incoherence in light rail networks and in tramway networks that I believe is a shared feature of these all having been historically retained systems. And again, the newer ones, like again, Copenhagen, not Copenhagen. Copenhagen is. I meant to say Bordeaux. I have no idea why I just said Copenhagen. The Bordeaux network is rather coherent. Again, it's not all of them. Like Strasbourg is not very coherent. Um, so the tramway in Strasbourg um, has kind of imitates historic tramways. To the point when I saw this, I thought, oh yeah, that's a historic tramway. No, it's not. It's a new tramway. And it's supposed to be very cute. I've never been, but it's supposed to be a very strong system. But again, the ridership is 70 million in a in a metro area of a million. It is, and it's not complementing a metro or an S-Bahn Strasbourg. I mean, they have TERs, aka they don't have commuter trains. And yeah. So the French systems are all new, and And so, but in France, where do you retail? Well, you drive to Carrefour or to Monoprix. I mean, sure, if you live in a city and don't have cars, you can walk, but most people own cars if it's not Paris. So it's not. So already there's a lot of this, not quite job sprawl, but maybe retail sprawl is a big thing. Um, and again, it's France, which has like much easier time doing urban retail than the United States. Essentially, uh, prices at the supermarkets in Paris are about half what they are in New York. Prices at the supermarket in Berlin are somewhere between half and two-thirds what they are in Paris. Yeah, yeah, and this is where you're getting things like IKEA. Like so stuff like shopping for furniture is done at IKEA, and IKEA is never urban. I mean, you can do urban IKEAs, they just don't do urban IKEAs. I mean, like in Vancouver, for example, there's an IKEA, but it's not near anywhere in I think somewhere in Richmond, but it's not accessible from SkyTrain. They didn't pick a location accessible from SkyTrain, um, and it's a very common thing. Um, and this also has knock-on effects on urban housing because it means that it's inconvenient if you don't own a car to furnish your own apartment. So that forces you into furnished apartments, which, having lived in furnished apartments for the last 8 years, here's my advice: don't do it if you can avoid it. Um. Anyway, um. So I don't know Manchester very well at all. Like I know that Manchester has these tramways. I don't think they even get the 100 million people. No, the 170. No, it's not 100. It's not. It's 100. The 100 million people that you get out of Bordeaux. I think the model splits are actually similar. The model splits in secondary England. I think it's only the teens. So Birmingham, Liverpool, Bristol, Manchester. I think they all have model split, like trip to work model splits around 15-ish%, which is again, it's the same as secondary urban France. Uh, it's kind of weird. Like overall France and England are the same. It's about 15%. I think the average is that the way it averages out is that Paris is a little bit better than London, but London is a larger share of England's population than Paris is of France's. And I'm saying England because the data I saw is England and Wales, to the exclusion of Scotland. I have no idea what it's like in Scotland. I imagine Scotland would average the same just because Glasgow and Edinburgh, but I mean, how many people live in Scotland? 5 million, 6 million? It's like not gonna be that much of a difference in the United Kingdom. But anyway, so the point is that if you're trying to build a new streetcar, and I'm focusing on Eastern Europe just because Western Europe is already doing its thing, but so in a place in Eastern Europe that wants to, I don't know, have what Warsaw has, maybe without peace, um, I would advise, first of all, I would say it's probably possible to do that, but again, don't just isomorphically mimic what the networks look like. Think a lot about the TOD. This is especially hard in a place like Vilnius, again, like in Vilnius, Kaunas, Riga, and Tallinn, just because these are places that are depopulating. I mean, yes, the Baltics have very high economic growth. Not this, also not South Asia. Maybe Poland is a bad example because Poland also has very fast growth. So let me compare with all the before. It's not going to compress me that much. So Czechia is the wealthiest because Czechia already came into this being decently wealthy. Um, like 24K in 1990 was not a bad GDP per capita. I mean Germany is gonna mess with the entire graph just because it's higher, but also Germany had shit growth in the 90s. Eurosclerosis it is called. So this was Germany. So I mean Prague was two-thirds, no, not Prague. Czechia was two-thirds of Germany. Prague was, same universe as the main West German cities. And it still is. Like, I mean, there hasn't been that much convergence because, um, It's like asking why there's no convergence between Germany and the United States. Well, they're that close. Um, so with that removed, let's look at the others. And I wanted to throw away the labels because they make things hard. So Lithuania somehow managed to grow very quickly. I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, after the financial crisis, like Lithuania has just recovered faster than the rest. Estonia also, like Latvia is poor. But Latvia also started out very poor. Uh, let me go here so that people can let me. Yeah, Germany. Yeah, Germany is with DDR, but DDR was one quarter of Germany. And evidently, so the DDR actually had very fast growth in this era as well. And I'm not showing you DDR, I'm showing you Czechia. But the DDR, so per capita income growth, if you go to Eurostat, in East Germany, like there's steady convergence. It doesn't look like convergence, and the reason is that it doesn't have a nationalist narrative of convergence the way that it does in, let's say, a place like Poland. So in Poland, so by the way, look, Hungary was here, and now it's here. Like Hungary has not had very good growth. And this predates Orban. Like Orban has been terrible, but MSZP were so terrible that they literally nominated some very right-wing guy for the United for Hungary ticket, just because they wanted to avoid like MSZP politicians in their package. So anyway, the so Hungary is so Latvia is basically converging with Hungary and with Poland, but so Poland was very poor, much poorer than Hungary. Latvia was even poorer. Like people talk about how, oh my God, how much what they did to themselves, the Baltics, with the austerity plan. Yeah, there was a pretty big contraction from here to here, and now Latvia's here. Um, and again, Lithuania and Estonia are here. Um, and so this is pretty fast growth, but often so in Poland, so in China, there's very much a nationalist model. We're growing and we're strong and we can tell other people what to do and it's really nice. In Eastern Europe, it's less like this, and it depends. So in Poland, they have that narrative as well. In East Germany, it's not, and it's always because of this proclivity. So I mean, yeah, in Poland, you could talk about how Poland is strong and how all the Jews and the queers should be killed. And if you think I am exaggerating, this was literally my Twitter mentions earlier today. And I had multiple people expressing regret that they weren't killing enough Jews in Poland. And so but I mean, these people in Poland, I mean, yeah, they talk a strong game and they have really good economic growth, but they're still going to be to like clean houses in Britain and in Germany. Um, like Poland is depopulating, and and I think maybe it's going to reverse itself if there's going to be more Ukrainian immigration and more Belarusian immigration, but I mean, that's not an infinite pool of people. Uh, and um, and also, and it's the same in the Baltics. And now in East Germany, it's even more because it's the same country. So East Germany lost its country. I mean, they became part of another country. Um, Unification was essentially the annexation of the East by the West. The constitutional structure is entirely Western. Um, most of the ideas are Western. I mean, and the people who are trying to run an Eastern identity are all doing so as part of anti-regime parties, chiefly Die Linke, that are viewed as toxic in the West. So even though there's a lot of economic growth, there's just not a lot of pride. Like there's very little to be proud of because if you're in Thuringia, yeah, incomes have risen, but you know that incomes are higher in Munich. The your kids who you have bullied relentlessly because you were afraid they were queer fled and are now happily living in well, maybe you do this to both of your kids, and then one of them is in Berlin and another is in Munich or something. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I know multiple people in Berlin, multiple queers in Berlin who fled here from parts of East Germany that are not East Berlin. I also know a handful who fled Eastern Europe. So it's definitely a thing, and it's just very acute when it's Eastern Europe. Oh, not really when it's East Germany. So the so even so incomes are up and social outcomes are up. It's just because it's essentially it's being in the periphery of another country, a rapidly converging periphery, but still a periphery. It doesn't lend itself with the same pride that you see in China, or again, even in Poland, where they can pretend that they're not all going to clean houses. And yeah, Slovakia's growth. Yeah, Slovakia converged with Slovakia has mostly not converged. I mean, Slovakia's here, but Slovakia has done a lot to converge with Czechia. But also Slovakia was kind of the periphery of Czechoslovakia. I mean, the center of Czechoslovakia was Prague, not Bratislava. I'm sorry. Um, and again, Poland has strong growth. The Baltics have strong growth. It's just that it's with emigration. I mean, and it's not only that, it's emigration of workers. So these places are disproportionately retirees. So again, there's not much inspiration. There's not much pride. But again, things are getting better. These places are getting better. But it also means that they can't rely on a lot of redevelopment unless they expect very high migration numbers, which they aren't. And because if I'm an immigrant and I have no connection to Lithuania, why would I move to Lithuania? I mean, Germany. I mean, if I can move to Lithuania, I can move to Germany. Um, I'm somewhat likely to be speaking German than to be speaking Lithuanian. Uh, Lithuanian is maybe also a better. Maybe it's because it's not Slavic, it's Baltic, and Estonia is Finno-Ugric. Then, if I'm Ukrainian, yeah, maybe Poland's easier for me. I don't know. But why would I move to Lithuania? Um, and so anyway, so the result. Yeah, yeah. You see, yeah. You obviously hear people who manage. Like, I mean, obviously people. I mean, people do learn Czech. People do learn German. People do learn Polish. It's just. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's kind of visibility issue. Um, I mean, New York is full of immigrants who don't speak English. I didn't interact with them because why would an immigrant who doesn't speak English interact with me? I mean, maybe unless they're Israeli, but the immigrants in New York who don't speak English are not Israeli. They're Hispanic, they're Chinese, they're Korean, maybe Russian. Definitely not Israeli. And so and so what I'm saying is that you can't necessarily do so. Like in a place like Paris, in a place like London, you can say whatever, and TOD will save you. It's harder in a place like Riga. It's harder in a place like Tallinn. Um, Maybe in the future. But there isn't an infinite supply of rural people to move to the city. A lot of the rural people move to the city, except the city is not Riga or Tallinn or Vilnius or Kaunas. The city is uh, London or maybe Munich or Frankfurt or maybe Stockholm or maybe Helsinki. So, um, so the growth potential is kind of limited. So you can do a little bit of TOD, but you can't do. I want to say New York quantities of TOD, but New York does very little TOD. The quantities of TOD where that you could do in New York if New York had a more pro-development government. Yeah, and it's also a system in Japan where all of these places. Um, why would you move to Toyama when you can move to Tokyo? Um, and yeah, Eastern European capitals, yeah, they can grow, and I mean maybe some non-capitals like Kaunas can grow. Like I think in Ukraine, actually, every city except Kiev is shrinking, but I can see a universe in which Kharkiv and Lviv and Dnipropetrovsk and Odessa are growing. Um, Same thing with, let's say, Gdansk or Krakow or Łódź, or maybe Katowice if they can like turn it into a real urban center. Um, but yeah, that's not most of Poland. Like most of Poland does not live in the major cities, and for the purposes of this sentence, a place like Wrocław counts as a major city. And yeah, they're talking about compactors, about a lot of consumption-oriented urbanism, which is a lot, I think, of what animates people who think that tramways are more moral than other forms of public transit, because trams are somehow, and they look cuter, they look tradier. Usually, you're also gonna rebuild city center to have pedestrianized streets and like transit malls to get the cars out of the way of the trams. Whereas with buses, I mean, buses are like bigger cars. Sorry, not sorry. Subways are not on the street, so you don't do this street reconstruction. Um, and so you get a lot of this consumption theoretic urbanism, which is not what animates the biggest tram network. I mean, I, so again, the biggest in the world are Budapest and St. Petersburg, and if not mean another of them. Not that I'm saying St. Petersburg, where it's not Sant, it's Sankt. So in St. Petersburg and in Budapest, um, again, I've never been, but I have been to Prague. Um, yeah, sure, there are some rather pedestrian-oriented places there, but like walking a couple minutes outside the train station, and like there was already a highway underpass that I need to go under. So it's not like I mean, it's not Amsterdam. It's not what people imagine of Amsterdam. It's not even real Amsterdam, which is unfortunately not as much of a velocity. I'm not going to be able to figure out the Latin for it on like the bike city that everyone thinks it is. And so in so again, so in Prague, I mean, yeah, I have trams. What are the trams? How do the trams look in these places? It's like buses, but tram and not a bus. And if the vehicle is relatively new, then you're going to have low floors. And if the vehicle is relatively new, then there might also be one articulated thing as opposed to two like units of 12 meters that are like chained together or something. And then and of course you're going to have shelter at the tramway stops because this is not America, but it's fundamentally surface transit. They're not trying to treat it as part of a street reconstruction plan. Which, by the way, does not mean that you should not pedestrianize the city. You should pedestrianize the city as much as you can, but I don't think it's as core to these tramway networks. Um, you can see a little bit of it in Leipzig. In Leipzig, there are some pedestrianized areas in the city center, but my recollection is that they're not. Let's see if I can find Leipzig. Leipzig, it's not even the biggest city that I visited a couple times. So this is the tramway network, and I believe that the pedestrian core of the city is what's enclosed by this. So you'll find it in a lot of cities. There's this kind of circular thing, roughly, that the trams take, and maybe it's not. And there's never going to be a tramway that completes the entire circuit, but they complete part of the circuit, and it's essentially always a matter of some kind of old city wall. So you're seeing this on the Leipzig map on the Leipzig tramway, the schematic. It's this, because historically this was the boundary of the city, and maybe the city walls were turned into boulevards or arterial roads, and so they're convenient for a tramway. It's a very common thing. You can see it in so many continental cities. Maybe not all of them, because in Paris it's harder to see. But also Paris was the largest Western medieval city. And the walls were expanded many times. But the more recent walls you can still see. So this wall, it was the wall from I think just before the revolution to the expansion of the city in 1860. Yeah, that's Metro 2 and Metro 6 on the boulevards that form this. And then the wall of the city after the expansion was this. And it had a thickness. So the outer part is currently the periphery. The inner part is these large, these wide-looking boulevards that have the tramway in them, T3. They're called the Boulevards of the Marshals because the Boulevard des Marshals, because they're all named after various Napoleonic era marshals. And in between them, there was just a thickness. This was all like a military zone for the city walls. They were demolished after World War I think. So yes, in the modern era of industrial warfare, Paris was building a city wall. I mean, it didn't look anything like a medieval city wall, but a wall. Yeah. I mean, centers have transit malls in the city center, but it's uncommon. Usually you go around because pedestrians go in city center, not tramways. The tramways aren't going to run any faster than pedestrians walk, which beats the purpose of having public transit, which is supposed to be faster than walking. And so yeah, pedestrianization is a good thing, but it's not. But the transit mall stand, I don't think is the best use of effort. So it's more important to just have tramway networks that again form coherent networks. It's useful. Again, lots of places don't, but it's places that are just meshes that kind of co-evolve with the city. If you're doing something from scratch, or if you're reworking a network, you probably wanted to not have Zagreb levels of interlining. So a nice thing you can do about trams, by the way, is that you can run them by site at very high. Yeah. And Zavingshots is also two of the U-Bahn lines for not for enclose it, but also I think there are things that go inside. But that's the U-Bahn. But so because you can run trams by site, you can have very high frequency on them, especially if you double berth. You can do, I don't know, 1 minute headways. And so you can't do them very reliably. You can't do them on a long line, but if it's a short segment, like a couple of blocks, that a few trams interline, they can go in whatever order, and it's all by sight, then it's fine. You're not gonna have a lot of reliability, unfortunately, but so you're not gonna have the reliability of a motor. Just forget about it. But you can run on a talk. You can run on a 7.5 minute talk, for example, or a 5 minute talk. And I have no idea if they're in Zagreb. I know they're in Zurich. In Zurich, it's I think all 7.5 minute talks. And they print the timetable and you at the stations, and you can know what time to wait. There are Google Zurich workers who know the exact time to leave work to the second to make a pedestrian stoplight that lets them get to the tram that is timetabled to connect to the train station that takes them to the airport with the least amount of time to spare if they're flying and they're going direct from work. So that's Swiss levels of precision. Can you have them in a different place? Yes, you can. You might need to meter cars. So what they do is so both Basel and I think to some extent Zurich do it. So Basel does have a pedestrian city center. It doesn't look like a pedestrian city center. They do let cars in sometimes, but with heavy restrictions. Zurich has some kind of metering that limits the number of cars in the city. So this is something they should be doing, but again, it's not going to look anything like a tourist city center, like the city center, like the historic center of Leipzig, or any other city like that, where a lot of stuff that interfaces tourists is there, but usually the main economic production is not there. So again, so bear in mind, I mean, there's no inherent morality to the green vision of a tram and bike city to the exclusion of subways, buses, and high-speed rail, and of course cars. Buses, I mean, yeah, buses are not as good, and buses are very inconvenient, and buses are also labor intensive. Maybe it's not as relevant if you're Riga, but if you're Riga, you should expect to soon not have the incomes of Riga. Estonia is already pretending it's like Finland. And Finland is very slowly, but it is trialing driverless buses. I mean, only in closed circuits, because driverless buses cannot run in normal traffic without randomly shutting down. But they're trying. But eventually, like, all of this needs to be subway / driverless tram of some kind. So again, think about the future. Try to replace the busiest buses, but again, do it in a way that creates a coherent network, not two random lines that are closely parallel that go when there's no real reason for this. You definitely want to work in conjunction with other things. So if there's So if there's an S-Bahn and you should have an S-Bahn, then please hit the train stations. Like I don't think Riga has that. And it would be something that these studies need to look at. Like I don't know how coherent I mean, so when I was visiting you, Pony, I don't know how coherent the commuter trains looked in Prague. They didn't look very coherent. They looked kind of bleh. Not even like what I saw in Leipzig, which is kind of more of a coherent S-Bahn, and I emphasize kind of. But but definitely you should make sure that everything works as part of a coherent whole. And if it's an inherited network, it might have seams, so you should fix the seams and make sure that your historic commuter trains, first of all, run at a frequency. Yeah, it's whatever is faster and closer. Okay, got it. So you definitely want something that works as part of the same system with good connections. And this goes both ways. It also means that if there's a good spot so if there's a streetcar that crosses uh, the tracks, you should probably build an infill station there. And maybe we're getting out of the tram world into the S-Bahn world, but I don't care. I mean, it's all part of the same public transit network. So again, think in terms of connections. Try to have a coherent network. Again, look at the success stories. I mean, you don't. I mean, the kind of Patrick Condon mentality for Vancouver, where he thinks that not only are streetcars inherently more moral than anything else, but also they should run on a grid. I mean, that's never done. I mean, nobody runs streetcars on a grid. Vancouver doesn't run trolleybuses on a grid. The trolleybuses are the north-south lines and 4th Ave and Broadway, and everything south of that is diesel. Like King Edward is diesel. I think 41st is partly electrified, but it runs diesel. 49th is diesel. It's Vancouver, so 4th Ave is near where I lived. Broadway is the main east-west corridor. King Edward's that's 25th. 41, 49. No, let me see if I actually got all of them right, or if I made it. And then it's the suburbs, and sometimes there are eastern anchors. The subway doesn't go into any of here. It goes it's called the Canada line. This is the Expo line. And this doesn't go to the city center, it only goes up until here. And then you transfer to the Expo line. It's called the Millennium line. Goes like this to Coquitlam. And so there's this idea that this should just be a grid. No, it shouldn't. I mean, if you have a street grid, then use it, but that's not where streetcars shine, because streetcars shine on dumping people in strong city centers. This is city center. What dumps people in city center is SkyTrain. The only good north-south buses so the buses are strong where SkyTrain isn't. So this is a strong bus which screams build SkyTrain. They are doing it, but only halfway through, only from the terminus, which is here, and they want to go all the way to UBC, and then construction costs exploded. So on the budget they thought would get them to UBC, they're only getting to Arbutus, which is this street, I believe. Like this, or not? No, it's this. This is Burrard. This is Arbutus. So they're gonna dump everyone here, and then make people transfer to severely overcrowded buses that are gonna go nonstop from here to UBC. So this needs to happen, and then you have some strong buses that go in like gaps between SkyTrain. So there are a bunch of strong north-souths go on Main Street. That's the 3, Fraser. That's the 8, and then Commercial / Victoria. That's the 20. And the fact that I remember the shape of the Vancouver bus network when I haven't been there in 7.5 years, that's just the grid. So the grids are really coherent. It's just that's not like really good thing for. That's not how you're going to do a streetcar network, because the stronger things here should just be a subway. Just as in Belgrade, yeah, largest streetcar only European metro area. And now they have an S1 tunnel, and they're building 2 metro tunnels. Because they need that. And Vancouver is a bigger city than Belgrade by a little bit. And so So in Vancouver, I don't think they should be building streetcars just because of the urban layout is good for just doing trolley buses and SkyTrain. I want to say sorry, Patrick Condon, but I do not want to apologize to Patrick Condon. The guy's an asshole. Um, and you notice, by the way, that I'm barely talking about North America at this point. I'm not thinking about North America when I'm talking about trams. I'm thinking about cities in Europe that should have these. That's wrong. No, no, no. The Ontario line would not have been Patrick Condon because Condon is severely anti-subway. He thinks that um, streetcars are more moral than subways. Again, it's a very NIMBY kind of urbanism. Um, and no, the Ontario line is something that it's the downtown relief line in Toronto, and then it was renamed the Ontario line when Doug Ford wanted to pretend that he came up with the idea. It's a common thing of very personalistic governors that they will try to make someone else's idea their own by making some change, often to the name. Triborough became interborough. I mean, and then there was a big change of removing the Bronx from it, which I don't think was necessarily a terrible choice, but it's a choice that I think that they should have explained in a lot more detail than they did. Uh, but again, that's just I don't want to rant about North American commuter rail. But no, and so in this part of the world, again, build trams, expand trams, they're good. But if you don't have trams, then introduce them. I mean, don't maybe do it one line at a time. Maybe you want to do it as a couple lines at a time for a system, which is something that is not how North America rolls. North America likes doing things very slowly and then doesn't build scale. Um, but if you're like an Italian city and trying to introduce trams, yeah, do that. It's fine. I mean, just bear in mind that you need to have a network, and the network needs to connect with other things. Um, and the same is true of, I think, everywhere here that doesn't already have trams. Again, they're a good arsenal to use. Not if you're a very large city, but I mean, all the very large cities have metros. Uh, but if it's within a range of a couple kilometers and you have a decently preserved city, and I don't mean like a historic like tourist city center. I mean something that's not at the radius of half a kilometer, something at the radius of 3, 4, 5, 6 kilometers. Then yeah, go for it. That's fine. I think these are the main guidelines. And note, by the way, these distances, this is why I'm not talking about North America. This does not exist in North America. In North America, you have single-family houses a kilometer from city center. There's there's no commercialization. There's just unfortunately, there's just a few blocks of high-rise and then sprawl. So you feel a bit antimatter. You need to go in all direction. Yeah, yeah. So if there was a metro, what do you mean if there was? Zulu lives in Prague. There is a metro. Yeah, they center more things around it, but this also means that the direction you need to go in is more likely to be where the metro goes. Because it means that, for example, your employer is going to maybe build their office close enough to city center that people can commute from all directions. And that's equal to of trams. I mean, trams are not everywhere to everywhere. Trams are pretty like again, this is Leipzig. I mean, you don't go in all directions from here. You go rum, 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 rum. I mean, yeah, sure, you have connection points, but and maybe they're a little bit thicker than on a 3-line or 4-line metro system, but it's not an everywhere to everywhere system, not at all. Oh God, they're in an office park. Why? Do they assume that just everyone has a car or something? Ugh. This is, by the way, why I keep talking about commercialization and downtown high rises. You want to keep the jobs commutable by train. Oh, so an ex-urban office park. Got it. Got it. Oh, it's something like Amsterdam Zuid or these places that are trying to build a skyscraper district that you can't see from the tourist ghetto. Oh, okay, okay, okay. Yeah, but still, I mean, just one station. It's kind of, and as opposed to an intersection of lines, it is kind of weird. Um, so are there, so I think I'm like organically stopping at this point. So are there questions? We're gonna have like 2 hours of stream. I mean, it is 2 hours of stream. The rec time is always a little shorter. Oh, it's an infill. Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, trams don't have much of a line identity. Line identity is a very metro specific thing because metro systems can have a small enough number of lines that identity makes sense. Um, and the reliability, and because the main sources of delays on a metro are internal to the metro, you can control the network layout better, whereas on a tramway network, you're going to have other sources of delays from the streets anyway. It's not just Central and Eastern Europe. I mean, like you only have strong line identity. If you have this on newer systems, which are a little bit cleaner, but also just weaker. And even then, I mean, the Bordeaux network, I mean, line D shares tracks with line C, so it's not. I mean, the Stadtbahn systems of note don't have line identity very much. It's a bunch of. I mean, I don't know to what extent they move lines between them. They move branches between the lines, but there just isn't very much line identity on this. Um, bear in mind, Berlin. I'm not sure about Hamburg, but Berlin and Munich both have rather weak line identity on the U-Bahn as well. Like strong line identity is not a feature of German U-Bahns. Yeah, exactly. Like it's never a perfect system. There are always seams. These are all also historic network. What do you mean? Sorry, you arrived late. Oh, okay. So you're asking me a question. Got it. Um, so yeah, type it out. I'll answer. Yeah, you have diversions. You have lines that sometimes exist only to get something to that you have lines that only exist to get something to a depot. Yeah, so it may have been addressed. I mean, sure, ask anyway. Are there American cities where I think it would make sense to construct new tram networks? I don't know. It's a good question. It's not a question that's been discussed much because I'm trying to punt because the answer is I don't know. Um, like a lot of streetcar things in the United States are people trying to imitate are like are essentially isomorphic mimicry. So the land use is not there. For example, the TOD is only on the street itself, whereas normal mid-rise DOD has thickness. So if you look at the urbanism, let me see if you can see it in Berlin, for example, how easy it is to spot. Um, but Berlin, you see that it's uniformly mid-rise. So the way it would work in an American city is they would DODify only the arterial. So this would, so yeah, sure. Buildings would look like this, like if they just flanked the street, and then everything else would just be single-family houses with large lots. So you don't have enough density to populate the line. And then you also don't have enough density to support retail on these major streets. You need more residential to support retail than you think. The ratio in Manhattan is, I believe, 1 to 30, 1 square meter of commercial to 30 square meters of resi. So you need to populate with a thickness to have a commercial drag. So if you don't have a commercial drag, then people aren't going to walk on it. And then, yeah, okay, it's a tramway corridor, but whatever. And then, and then if you, so you're not gonna have enough people, and then you're not gonna be able to support high frequency, and then the low frequency is gonna kill whatever's left of your ridership. Take the Portland streetcar comes every like 17 minutes or 18 minutes to the point that if you missed it, you just walk the whole way. So there's just kind of tendency to construct these things, and there are generally mixed traffic because the idea in the United States is if you have a reservation, it's light rail and it cannot run entirely on a street. And so I imagine you could do tramways in some cities and they would work. New York actually would have some really strong corridors, but in New York, I mean, New York is New York. We're like in New York, like I keep telling people that New York is the #1 city in America, and extra rail ridership it can get per capita out of good transit. Yes, it's ahead of LA. LA has zero rail ridership at this point, and it could have much more than zero if it does things correctly. But New York can rise in absolute numbers by more than LA. Just because, yeah, there's all these subway extensions can be built. And then the places that don't have good subways, yeah, you can do in New York a bunch of streetcars and that's going to be fine. It's just that that's essentially finding gaps in where it would be coherent to build a subway in New York, if that makes sense. And that is a very New York specific thing. No, I would not replace the entire SBS with that. I would not, for example, do first and second on the tramway because there's the subway. No, I would do things like 14th Street, maybe 86th. I wouldn't do 125th because that should be a subway. You could do a weird subway surface, except not subway surface, but elevated surface using Brooklyn Bridge. So take 2 lanes from cars. Drivers will complain. Tell them that the city would be better if they moved to Florida. You go Park Row to, or maybe you drop to surface for a loop around here. And then you cross the bridge, and then from the bridge you drop to surface. You want to go on Flushing and hit the redeveloping Navy Yard, and then also have connections up to roughly not quite. This is not where like this is like up to roughly Freshwater / Ridgewood. Then you want a streetcar that goes down Flatbush, which already has a subway, but you're just going to continue on Flatbush. And sub for, I think the B41 is the bus. Yeah, B41 is the bus that goes on Flatbush. It's just a really bad subway corridor because where is it going to go? I mean, there are 6 subway tracks on top here, and they all go different places. Because 4 of them go Eastern Parkway, and then 2 go onto this trench. Like, it looks like you're continuing from this trench up until here, and that's only, and it's not. Like, this is a shuttle that goes Fripp. The main trains that go under Flatbush, and then either over Manhattan Bridge or through a tunnel over here. R train and Q trains. And yes, I know actually the trains that go here all go bridge and not tunnel. You know what I meant. And so you have Flushing, then you have Flatbush, and then maybe find a corridor to Red Hook. Just like Red Hook is going to be really annoying because good corridor for Red Hook is Court. Is this one? I'm going to lose my New York license for not remembering the street right of. Yes, Court. So the good corridor to hit Red Hook is Court, and then it's literally a block from the subway, so the connectors are going to suck. It's annoying, but what can you do? This is kind of a weird subway surface, except elevated surface. But again, a really weird New York specific feature. Gamarad, yeah, go ahead. You can ask me about a weird development in Toronto. Do you mean the one that everyone today is talking about on Twitter with the double loaded corridor, the one that looks like Tetris, or something else? It's called the Orbit. Dev, where is it? Like, can you help me figure? Let me actually check. Okay, they're telling me about the orbit room, but not the orbit. If you ask me where it is, I might even like data. So the number you're giving me is very high density, but it is density that exists. It is kind of top line density for New York housing projects. Like if you have a census tract that consists of just one Manhattan housing project, that is roughly going to be the density. Nisfil, okay. Um, yeah, it is kind of a weird location for it. Innisfil, Ontario. Yeah, I mean it's kind of weird that they're doing it there um rather than in more central. Yeah, this is a really bad location. I mean, if for some reason you can't demolish single family homes here, then at least go here. Also demolish single family homes here. Um, but yeah, it's so the density is high, but exists, right? It's this density. Uh, Again, it's high. It's very high end, but this is slightly less than twice. Sorry, slightly less than twice the density of the Upper East Side. But the Upper East Side has lower density areas near the park. And I think there are multiple census tracts on the Upper East Side surrounding the project that hit that or hit very close to that. Yeah, it's the same as the density of the turn. Yeah, again, this is not outlandish density. It's high, but it's not outlandish. And I'm looking at the land use in these pics. Yeah, I mean, the distances between the buildings look excessive, but buildings this tall, if they're packed like it's Manhattan, yeah, why not? Um, like this is not like the problem is not the numbers. The problem is that for whatever reason they're putting it there. They're putting it here near Barry and not here if you can't do any better. Or you see this? Does this look like the kind of density that you want to have within walking distance of Blue here, maybe? Or I think the Ontario line's supposed to go here. So yeah, so here, these two. Or here. I mean, you don't want to, like, it is not stress, already, but yeah. So, oh, you're in when you say where you are now, is it, you mean Barrie or do you mean East York slash Rosedale? Sorry if I don't know my Toronto geography as well as I should. I lived in Vancouver, I did not live in Toronto. Oh, East York slash Rosedale, yeah. Legit. I mean, anyway, put the KWC, put the KWCMB here or wherever or here, wherever the Ontario line goes. Actually here, if you want to do an info on the, like, on Lakeshore East. Um, anyway, does that answer your question? Okay, are there other questions? I may have broke my fidget spinner, which I literally just bought. I may have, I mean, it's definitely broken. It was fun for the 2.5 hours that it lasted. 3 hours that it lasted. Okay, I'm gonna give people, I don't know, 2 more minutes to type questions because I know, again, because there's always a lag and people take time to type. And I'm miffed about, see, there are cracks. Did I mention cost per kilometer? No, because I don't know. Um, I can get you a few data points, but I mean, I don't actually know. Like, I don't know urban ones very well. I know some German quotes. I think it's something like 20. I want to say $30 million, not euros per kilometer, is normal at this point. But maybe it's for more suburban expansions that are still in streets, but are not in as developed areas, maybe. Um, so I don't know what the urban cost is. And again, it's not, because these are not mega projects, they're not very well reported. In the same way that I can get you a complete list of the ridership of our metro system, but not of every light rail system. Sure, no problem. Are there more questions? Um, if not, then I can end this. Uh, if you're watching it on Twitch, don't forget to sign up tomorrow for TransCon. I'm going to speak about high-speed rail. If you're watching this on YouTube, same thing, I'm going to upload right now. So today for you is still Saturday. Tomorrow is Sunday, the 30th of January. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow. And if not, I imagine I will see you in a week with another video. So ciao, ciao.